series. Paula.
Sorry.
Let me start again. So it is a pleasure to welcome our final talk in this series, Paula Rego and her contemporaries. The exhibition is still ongoing. So if you haven't seen it already, you can book tickets online on the European Parliament's Liaison Office website. It is open until the 16th of July. Last week, we heard from Cliff Andrade, one of the selected artists, in what proved to be a very deep and insightful session. Cliff was joined by Mara and Catherine Zunz. This week, we have the pleasure of being joined by Elena Crippa, Manuel Lisboa, known as Manusha, and Catarina Alfaro, as well as our wonderful curator, Mara Alves. I'll quickly say a few words to introduce our panel, then I'll leave the floor to them. So Mara Alves is the curator of Paula Rego and her contemporaries. She's a contemporary art curator from Lisbon, currently studying an MA in art history at the University of London. Her platform, Portuguese, aims to promote Portuguese culture internationally, and she has curated an array of art projects in London, including for Caspia Contemporary Gallery, the Dragon Gallery, Start Art Fair, and at the Contemporary Gallery, where she was the chief curator for 3 years. Elena Crippa is the Tate's curator of modern and contemporary British art. She studied curating contemporary arts at the Royal College of Art before completing her PhD at the London Consortium and taught exhibition studies at Central St. Martin's. She's currently curating Paula Rego retrospective at the Tate's that opens next month and will run into the autumn, which we are very excited about. Manuel Lisboa is a professor of Portuguese literature and culture at St. John's College in Cambridge. Her specialities include 19th century literature and visual arts, with a particular focus on gender, religion, and national identity. She has published 2 books on Paula, the most recent being essays on Paula Rego, Smile When You Think About Hell, from 2019. And Catarina Alfaro is the chief curator at the Casa das Histórias Paula Rego. She studied history of art at Nova University in Lisbon, where she went on to do a master's and then a doctorate. She was a researcher and curator at the Carlos Gulbenkian Foundation. So I hope you enjoy this session, this last session of our series.
Thank you, Adriana. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today, and a special thanks to Catarina, Manuel Lisboa, who we can call from now on Manusha, and Elena. Thank you so much for accepting to participate in this talk today. So I guess that we shall start by I will explain briefly that we will be seeing some of the selected works that are on show at the moment. So I've selected 11 graphic works from Paula Rego, and I guess that a good starting point would be around this specific technique and its unique expression from Paula Rego's oeuvre. And so I would start by asking you how important do you think it is for Paula Rego's works and her creative practices, this specific technique?
Difficult to know who should go first. Maybe I can just begin by saying something about the context of studies of Paula. She was a student at the Slade School of Fine Art in the mid-50s. And what is very interesting about that context is that printmaking by then was not considered a sort of primary activity. Painting and sculpture were truly the foremost activities that an artist should have the ambition to work with. And printmaking was truly considered a sort of secondary activity that artists did when they didn't find space in the life room, or as a secondary practice, which is of course a real shame, because it's such a rich activity with such a long history. Likely at the Slade School of Fine Arts, they had an incredible head of department, Anthony Gross, who was a really fine etcher and someone who had studied, especially in Paris, when the tradition of etching had such a long history. And the printing department at the Slade was very important for many artists, particularly quite a few female artists who felt the life room was a very competitive space where painters had to sort of fend off. And also we need to think studying at that particular time in the early 50s was particularly tough. Paula was a very young artist, and at the time there was a very large number of male artists who had received scholarships to study once they had returned from the army. So you had all these really mature artists who had to prove themselves. And many artists have commented that the etching, the printing rooms were in a way a very special place, which allowed a more intimate, less exposed way of working. When you drew or painted in the life room, it was in a way quite performative. You were doing it in front of everyone, while printing was a much more private activity. I think what is very interesting is that also later on, Paula described printmaking in this manner as something that allows you to step back from the sort of drama of the large piece of paper or canvas, and a much more intimate activity of looking in. And she also has described it as this activity that she very much enjoyed doing between paintings, as a way of working on a different format, of looking in rather than looking out. And she uses beautiful words. She said it's like diving into the sea after having been out in the sun for a long period of time. So this sort of change of tone and pace. And I think while she didn't use printmaking for a long period in her career, she did so at the Slade and for a few years later into the early 60s, and then very much returned to it in the 80s, proving herself technically truly extraordinary, both at printmaking in all different aspects of etching and using aquatinta and lithographs. So yeah, just an introduction in terms of the setting of her learning.
That's also, I think, Paula, for Paula, the process of engraving is also a path of continuity that enables her to recover the link to the automatic process that the practice of drawing is for her. And it is, since her childhood, a process that to a certain extent she interrupted in the early 90s. So she said so many times that is a process with a very physical component, and she explains that the resistance of the support calls for enables her to concentrate and confront herself with the infinite possibilities of this technique, with the story being developed as a response to the formal elements that she decided to be drawing and inscribed on the plate. So for her, it's she likes very much the incisiveness of the drawing and this physical experience. So
that's fascinating. It's almost like a self-absorbing practice. It's very private, and it is a difficult one. So it really requires you to be concentrated on what you are doing. That's really fascinating. Yeah, and especially because once you are engraving, you always need to make sure that you know what you are doing and playing with the light and shadows when you are engraving, because once it is printed, it will be reversed, right? So yeah. It is a very interesting technique. Yes, definitely. Thank you so much.
Actually, going back to what Elena was saying about her beginnings at the Slade, I think it's very important. And I think it does, I suspect it might have defined the way Paula Rego turned out to be. I always think of that song by Jarvis Cocker, Common People, which talks about a rich girl arriving to study art at the Slade School, and in the voice of the male singer is very patronizing. You know, this is a rich girl, so I'm going to, you know, have sex with her and then get her to pay for all my drinks. And he doesn't take her seriously at all. And I'm always reminded of the story that I've heard many people, including Nick Willing, her son, telling of when Victor Willing was already one of the great white hopes of young Brit art. And Paula would go with him to openings and shows, and people would ask her, so Paula, are you still dabbling as well? She's now enormously successful, but I think if you become very successful in your late 40s, having been patronized like that until then, I don't know you get over it. I would not get over it if I'd been that patronized, that dismissed for most of my adult life, well, until my late 40s. So I think a lot of the anger that I detect in her work, I think has to be linked to those biographical components as well. So back to her days in the Slade, and ever after, until of course she became so massive that now no one can patronize her.
Yes, exactly. That's a good point. Very good point. Thank you, Manusha. Really good. And yes, we will definitely talk about her starting, because she did struggle a lot at the beginning. So that's a good point out for us to also discuss, continuing this conversation. So I'll start by showing so the first piece that we have on show, which is a very special piece. So first of all, it is the first time that this piece is being shown. So the top one is the actual plate that resulted in the bottom work. So this is called La Mano Muerta. And this is the top one, a plate that Paula drawn in around 1962, 64. So she drawn this plate in London, and then she brought this plate with her to her family house in Portugal, where she had to hid this work because at the time we were living under Salazar regime. And so because she was already doing some works against fascism, the SNE were threatening to search her studio. So she had to hid this plate. And fortunately, it was discovered last year and recovered, restored, and printed now into this edition for us all to see and appreciate. So this is a very special piece because of the story behind it as well, and because it addresses defiance against oppression. And while we do still experience other types of oppression still today in the 21st century, but I guess that now my next question to you would be how relevant, in your opinion, is Paula's work in the contemporary world? So this is for you three. Feel free to engage.
Well, I suppose you'd have to ask her fellow artists around the world. I think, you know, you don't become this important a name in the field of the visual arts without having an enormous influence on your contemporaries, whether they like you or don't like you or your work. I think she's what we in Portuguese like to call incontornável, unavoidable now, certainly for Portuguese artists, but for British artists as well. Now, after all, she's having this massive retrospective in Tate Britain, which signals her importance, her visibility, her unforgettability, if that word exists. So, of course, whether you acknowledge that effect or not, I think she's got to be an important presence, I would say.
Yes, yes, yes. I agree, and especially I think that, well, I've been saying this a lot, but I do believe that her work is also intemporal in a way. So it doesn't matter if it was done 20, 30 years ago. It seems like it's very much current, especially the subjects, some subjects that Paula addresses as well, and that is quite important as well. In our current days. Yeah. Thank you, Manusha. Okay, so I guess that we can move to the next one. So I'm showing the works as they are on display. So they are displayed in a chronological way as well at the exhibition. And so the secrets and stories. So this is a very playful piece. And it's a simple one. It's children playing and it represents their unique world. And so what I find most of the times when looking at Paula's work is I always get this sense of double meaning in between the most simple works and the most provocative works as well. So I would ask if you think that there's this double meaning between the symbolic, imaginary, and reality in Paula's work as well.
I think we have to. This double meaning is always present in the fairy tales and and of course Paula Rego is unique on the way that she takes on tales as a testament to a particular context in which she grew up, rebelling against suffocating dictatorship, persecution. And Paula Rego, and in this engraving you can see a girl reading to another a huge book. And for me, it remembers me the relation that she had, for example, with Gustave Doré, the illustrations from the Hell. And that was, she describes it as something magical, that it was always present, this kind of enchantment with the fairy tales, and the illustrations from the fairy tales is always present in her work. And because she's aware of the subversive potential of tales. And I look for an interview and where she tells that folk tales show human nature as it is, without being corrupt by the idea of how it should be, or any sentimentality. People think that children should be protected from the cruelty in these stories, but they do not care. They like it because they understand them very well. So I think Paula is very aware of this subversive potential of the tales and the fairy tales in which we grow up. So it is so important to her. And this engraving for me, it's like it's the secrets and the stories that are hidden in this kind of stories. So in fairy tales, particularly in folk tales.
Yeah, that's interesting. Very interesting, Catarina. Thank you. Do you want to say anything, Elena?
Oh, no, I just wanted to add that, just looking at this particular print, I absolutely agree with everything that's been said. But to me, there is also something extraordinary about two things that really struck me looking at this image is Paula's capacity to render the nuances of gestures and the way we use our bodies to express emotions And this is, I think, is something that she was extraordinary since a teenager, since even before starting art school. This capacity to visualize our non-verbal language and the way she depicts these gestures, micro gestures, these expressions. And the other, to me, is the just extraordinary gentleness of her drawing. And this is, to me, particularly true of her small scale drawing. And this moment in the late 80s when she returned to drawing from life. And you can really see how attentive she is to the gestures, the expressions. And I think in her drawings, to me, more than in her painting, you really have that extraordinary, you know, sense of, yeah, there is something really gentle and different to what you have in the painting, when it's maybe transformed and elevated in a more staged and theatrical way. And I think it's something that maybe we notice less about her works, but I certainly see in some of the small scale work, particularly works like this one.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. And it's something that you kind of see more specifically in this type of technique that Paula uses as well, that attention to detail. Yeah, it is very present in her graphic work. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so I think that we can move to the next one. So the next one is Him. And this work was inspired by a poem written by Morrison, and the poem is called The Ballad of the Yorkshire Ripper, published in 1987. And so this is a human male has predator, so half human, half animal. It's a striking image, but especially on what I wanted to focus on this specific work is precisely the female figure and the powerful gaze, because she doesn't seem scared or struggling. And so I believe there's this strong feminist message across not only this work, but the next ones that we will see as well. I wanted to what would you say about how Paula represents these women in such strong settings and such powerful gazes?
Well, one of the things that always strikes me about not just this image, which is wonderful, but almost all Paula Rego's images that are depicted from prior narratives. For example, The Maids, that was taken from a play by Jean Genet, which itself was taken from a real life event of two maids in Paris who murdered their mistress. Obviously, the Yorkshire Ripper in the late 70s, early 80s, who killed an awful lot of women, mainly prostitutes, but not only. And which was obviously immortalized in The Ballad of the Yorkshire Ripper by Blake Morrison, is that Paula seems to take often narratives, and o crime do Padre Amaro, The Crime of Father Amaro, Essa de Queiroz, where women, and she takes narratives where women are hurt or killed, but in her images, they're not. She reverses those outcomes. So the women that you'd expect to be killed, hurt, eliminated, oppressed in any way, in her work are not. It's almost as though she can't bear to hurt women. She can't bear to depict female defeat or destruction. So she takes stories where the woman is in the original very badly hurt or murdered or destroyed in some kind of way, and she turns it on its head, and they're no longer that. So you're quite right that here we don't get the impression that this werewolf figure might be the Yorkshire Ripper or some figure of horror or fantasy. We don't get the impression that he's going to come out of it the winner. She's going to come out of it the winner. so there's at least that possibility that where you would expect to see a wounded woman or wounded female, you have the opposite. You've got the triumphant woman and the wounded attacker.
I think that it's a kind of a very, there is an ambiguity in this image, because between violence, weirdness, and seduction with the victim's consent. It's and Paula always, sometimes she introduces this ambiguity that is very, well, for us is shocking sometimes. And the fact that she uses this humanized animal, it's also important, because this Paula, she puts these animals, these hybrids, and situations of power and seduction, assuming the form of sometimes benign and sometimes they are frightening. And this occurs in some of Paula's nursery rhymes also. And it's very, there is always this ambiguity. We don't know if it's a seduction scene or is something more. It's like an enchantment situation that Paula always, she creates this complex universe with the idea of the transfiguration with animals and humans, and everything gets more complicated and more strange and weird. And
which is the case with a lot of images. We're going to get to the abortion image at some point, so I won't preempt that. But a lot of those images could be confused for standard depictions of seduction. For example, the one on the right-hand corner. We know this is a picture of, about abortion, but it could be a picture of sexual invitation, sexual ecstasy, pleasure. So she does play those games with posture and ambiguity, like Catarina says.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true.
And I think the other thing that she does, which is very important, and this for me was very fascinating to see, she does already in the late 50s. She, you know, one of her key strategies is to empower women through their sexuality, and in making their sexuality overt and fully embodied and trusting them forward. And this is extraordinary to think as an operation she was able to do so early on, when really we're looking at the really beginning of the feminist movement, and so few women were making pictures in which you had female characters who were sexually empowered. And this, I think, is one of the earliest and most extraordinary contributions of Paula Rego. And we can think of so many painters, female painters, of course, particularly, who came after her, who I believe were able to build on, you know, Paula's achievements, that sort of courage to step into this territory and empower women sexually. And I think it's very interesting, she did say, she read de Beauvoir's Second Sex when she was at Slade, so we are looking at the early to mid 50s, and she simply said, I simply agreed with all of it. But you know, that sort of capacity to truly understand the position of women, and then in a way, you know, revert it and create these images for a role of women that still didn't exist in society, because the position of women was not particularly precarious in Portugal. Even in the UK, you know, abortion was not legal. Women had not a freedom to decide on their body fully at all. So I think it was what she was doing really mattered enormously, not just in Portugal, but also in the UK and beyond.
Yes, that's true.
Yes.
Actually, sorry, Manusha. These three etchings that we are seeing now are part of series that she did for an exhibition in Portugal. but responding precisely to the Portuguese abortion referendum. So the subject around abortion and the way that she so vividly conveys this powerful meaning, and but at the same time the freedom that we can almost be within these settings, or be these women at the same time. So yes, I was wondering. So these etchings, then also in a smaller scale, and because she did develop a series around the abortion thematic, they could be seen as also in a way could be more accessible and reach more people. So it could work almost like a propaganda, showing her point of view as well. So in your perspective, you've also responded to this, Elena, but how important was that at the time, and how important it is today? So if we can bring that subject to our current days.
I will defer to Manusha because she knows so much on this subject.
Yes, of course. And I interrupted you, Manusha, sorry.
No, not at all. No, go, Elena, because I think the question was mainly to you. I can talk later. Go ahead.
Oh, no, it's okay. You can, I mean, any of you can talk.
Well, sorry, if you ask how important was it making this upfront, well, I was fascinated when the abortion untitled pictures first came out. The Portuguese catalogue managed the miracle of not mentioning abortion at all in talking about the images, which was stunning. Mm-hmm. Not a mention of the topic of the image at all, which I found shocking. You know, it's almost an affront to what this artist was doing to, you know, sweep. And this was 1988, this image, 99. And you think, no, that's right. It's also the abortion reference. I mean, that she did in response to us, and the idea that you could produce a catalog about images about abortion and not mention the word abortion at all was classic to me of hypocrisy and the desire to sweep things on the carpet, which again takes us back to Blake Morrison, who I think is one of the reasons Paula Rego likes him so much, is that he does address head-on the violence of men against women in Moth, which is another poem that Paula Rego also was inspired by, and did a picture of that title about the ballad of Yorkshire Ripper and the image that came out of that. And I think, given that she's such an upfront artist, you know, you can't avoid what she's doing. It always shocks me how people go round about these inconvenient aspects of her work and try not to see them or talk about them.
That's very true indeed, Manusha.
On that point, actually, Manusha, I also read an interview that Paula gave, saying how bizarre it was to be at an opening soon after the work was produced and exhibited, and seeing women visitors clearly recognizing themselves in the pictures and being deeply affected by them. And then hearing the men discuss them in terms of the formalism and
yes.
Which clearly is there. They are in a way very formally striking work, but the fact that those men visitors could only address the subjects, I guess, also speaks very much to your comments. Yeah.
That's true. Well, building on that, I would like to ask Manusha, how was it for you to research and write about Paula's work? And I would like you to share your contribution and how was it relevant also on a personal level to be able to develop and write about Paula's work?
Well, it's funny to start with. My work on Paula Rego starts with her turning me down. Because at one point when I'd already come to Cambridge, the University of Cambridge, to teach, I thought of inviting her to give a talk here about her work. And she said, well, I don't like talking about my work. Why don't you talk about my work? And I just written a book on Asset Queiroz. And she was just finishing her series based on the crime of Father Amaro. So it was like the heavens had opened up and angels came down and sang to me. So I went and she said, why don't you give a talk at the opening of the exhibition? So that's how it started. It started with literature, which often for Paula is where it starts as well, whether it's nursery rhymes or Kafka or Asset Queiroz or the many, many works she's done that have been derived from literature. That's how it started. To me, everything that she does speaks to things that have always concerned me. I'm a feminist. I'm a woman. I exist in a world that treats women quite badly on a regular basis. And it's impossible, like Paula Rego's reaction when she read Simone de Beauvoir, The Second Sex, everything she does speaks to me, because we've all been there. Whether you've walked down the street and you're afraid, because a figure like him might come up behind you and do something terrible to you, or whether you've been put down or overlooked or not even been given a feeling of recognition, which I suppose I can't complain too much about that, but it doesn't have to be about you personally. You see what's going around to other women as well. It's impossible for her work not to speak to women. And what Elena said about the man talking about the technical aspects of her work and the women here, oh, that's me, or that's my daughter, or my sister, or my grandmother, or whatever, in that position. I think it's there. It's impossible for her work, in her work, the political not to be personal as well.
Yes, that's definitely true. Her work are always can be always powerful statements and should question and change mindsets, definitely.
The women she makes me think about most when I look at her work at my grandmother's.
Oh.
Because of women of that generation who had no option but to be what they were told they had to be. And Paula looks much older than my grandmother would be, much younger than my grandmother would be. But my God, she understood that generation of women in Portugal like nobody else.
Yes, definitely we can relate. I mean, especially I can relate when looking at past generations and even my parents or my grandparents. Yes, definitely you can definitely resonate the message and the feeling, especially being a woman, and all the challenges. Yeah. Thank you, Mariusha. Thank you so much. So we can now move to the next one that is on show, which is Scarecrow, this beautiful and colorful lithograph. And so this is inspired by the playwright Martin MacDonald. And in Paula's perspective, this play meddles with religion, and it has also the connection of the little girl who wanted to be Jesus, also very much connected with somehow the Portuguese culture. So he has a religious thematic here, which I will leave to the next ones that we will show next. And then now these very two disturbing works that I really wanted to show you and talk to you about. So we have, on the left side, we have Night Bride, which is a work, part of a series dedicated to female genital mutilation. And then on the right side, we have That Goes Shopping, which is about trafficking subject. And so these images are quite disturbing in the way that they convey how children are treated and traded almost as objects and subject to controversial beliefs. And there's so much going on here, and these again are very disturbing images, but address real problematics and current problematics that we're still facing today. So I would like you to share about the social impacts from these realities and your perspective around these two works.
But I might just begin by saying that I think what is extraordinary is that Paula made these works when she was already 74, 75. And this again is something that I think there is a really interesting red thread in the way she operated across the decades, certainly since the 60s at least, in the way she responded in a really direct ways to reading or listening to the news, and becoming, listening to very specific episodes that mistreated all sorts of people, including workers who had to work in poor conditions, even dogs, the Dogs of Barcelona collage from the 60s, but of course, particularly women. And I think this is one of the really extraordinary things that Paula does. She hears this, including the abortion, she reads the news and she experiences this incredible pathos and rage and empathy, and then she injects it into her work. I think this is very much the origins of a considerable number of her work, including this series, when she responded to just reading and hearing about, all these constant events where women are abused. And something that certainly she is extraordinary at is hitting at the moment where women are both the victims but also the perpetrators, and exploring the very fine line whereby women, in order to continue social norms and habits and sort of allow society to continue in the way in which it's been constructed, effectively end up hurting their own children, their own daughters, the people they love. And I think this relationship, that she experienced in certain ways growing up herself, when, looking at women effectively damaging their daughters in order to preserve social norms, in order not to denounce abuse, in order not to point the finger at pedophiles and rapists and so on, has contributed to this history of continuous abuse. And what I find particularly extraordinary about Night Bride is that you have this figure that looks like Mara sitting down. And for me, that figure is really heartbreaking, because she's clearly a loving, caring mother, but she's also someone who is witnessing or enabling the mutilation to take place. And she really, has that capacity to explore the very fine boundaries of love and abuse in all sorts of different settings. And I just would say one more thing about Night Bride, because it's been read in many different ways. And again, I think this is something that Paula herself, offers as an invitation and enables different reading. But for me, what is very interesting about this picture is that we are looking both at the child, and this child we have seen in other pictures, she is a victim, but also there is this skeletal, monstrous woman who lies on the table, who in certain pictures he is the person performing operation, mutilating the girl, but he also seems to be the victim. And I think, again, this I think is really one of these key pictures in which she's pinpointing not just the relationship between victims and perpetrators, but also the perpetrators are often victims themselves. And yeah, I just think it's an incredibly difficult, but also incredibly moving picture. And that really visualizes something that is so often or so rarely sorely discussed. And again, you know, it's that pushing for making visible the invisible. And I think that very feminist notion that is only by making visible and speaking about abuse that we can begin doing something to address it and do it.
Yeah.
Yes, I completely agree with Elena. And it fits into possibly the last picture, escape.
Escape, yes, yes. I can put it up, yes. And this is completely in contrast.
Well, but it's funny because when I saw this, and it's one of the genital mutilation pictures,
it's part of the
I thought exactly what Elena has been talking about. I thought how interesting, because mainly terribly in the practice of genital mutilation, the mothers collude in, you know, doing this to their daughter. So how nice that here we have a mother that's not colluding, or maybe she's carrying her daughter to the place where this is going to be done to her. It's again very imponderable, but what Elena said was exactly what occurred to me when I saw this, and I thought, I hope this is the mother taking her daughter away rather than the mother taking her daughter to have it done to her, because mostly it's mothers, you know, colluding in what's expected of women, of girls.
Yeah, that's true. I think it is as always very brave of Paula to constantly depict what disturbs her, but above all, it disturbs all of us, especially when we do not share the same beliefs or the same culture has these specific thematics. So I wanted to just go back to the previous one. So this one, lamentation. So here we have so there's the depicting of pillow man in many works from Paula has a religious theme, and so this brings us back also to the scarecrow. And we know that Paula is not a religious person, so I wanted you to share your perspective around the religious themes that Paula develops, and what in your perspective do they convey in terms of critical thinking or purpose? And obviously this is very our own perspective. We don't have Paula here to talk to us about that, but it is what you can see here, you know.
I think Paula describes herself as, well, at this time, as a religious woman, actually. But reading some, in Casa das Histórias, we have now an exhibition about a religious work, precisely. Mm-hmm. And I read some of her interviews where she talks about this relation with Catholic religion. And she says that when she was very young, she felt an appealing to the mystery of the religion, the things that she could not, that could not be explained in naturalistic terms. So again, the mystery is very important to her work. And she also made some works that are related, some paintings related with the Catholic religion. First in 1991 for the National Gallery, Crivelli's Garden. And again, what she felt that was more appealing was she lists a series of female characters, representing them in a position of superiority in relation to men. I'm talking about the saints, Saint Catherine, that sometimes the martyrs from the Catholic narrative. And she subverts in this painting, again, the place of the aggressors and the victims. For example, Saint Catherine, she's immobilizing a torture, which is supposed to be the Emperor Maxentium. So, and the explanation that she gives is she didn't kill him. It's only symbolized the triumph of spirit. It's a revenge, but at the same time, she doesn't need to kill him. Again, Paula will, in 2002, she will make scenes from the life of the Virgin Mary to the chapel of Nossa Senhora de Belém in Palácio de Belém, which is a residence of our president. So Paula, the uniqueness of these works comes from the unusual look from and of the feminine. The way that Paula chooses to represent Virgin Mary, it's truly, it has a truly human dimension. And it's very interesting to see all that paintings that we can only see there, because Paula doesn't allow that the paintings came from the chapel. They were done specifically for this chapel. And they are very strong. And again, the image of Christ's mother is very real and very understandable for us. And we can feel all the pain, specifically in the scene of the birth, but also when Jesus dies. So it's very, very, it's a kind, for us, I think she turns very, it's very human, that suffering, and they are different kind of image that we are used to see, because also because Mary, the mother of Christ, she has an active participation in the death of her son. So it's very interesting to see those pictures, because we can feel the pain of this mother, and she's very, she's like any other mother, and Paula can capture this feeling, this anguish, and it's very...
Yeah, that's very fascinating. Yes, and I mean, speaking from my own experience, I can relate being brought within the oh my God, religious. Sorry about that. It is at some point you start making all these questions about suffering and sacrifice, and so it is interesting to see this. And by the way, Catarina, now that you were sharing with us the current exhibition, I would also like you to talk a bit about your own work at Casa das Histórias, so a museum in Portugal, House of Stories, translated. So you've been the chief curator there since 2010. And so I would like you to share with us how it has been developing arts educational programs and exhibitions. And I was also curious about how do you program and prepare the exhibitions, if you have in mind or try to keep present narratives between Paula Rego's works and the other artists that will be showing as well.
Well, since the beginning, the construction of Casa das Histórias, the museum, I made the calc, I count 22 exhibitions since the beginning. And these exhibitions are different because they must be different, because it's a monographic museum dedicated to only one artist. And sometimes we have to imagine other kind of exhibitions rather than particularly exposing works from the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. It's, well, something else. We have to do something else. And of course, we sometimes try to establish a close relationship with works by other artists linked to a figurative universe. And at this time we have at Casa das Histórias an exhibition about Josefa de Óbidos, the religious works, but also some specific relations that we can establish with Paula's works. We also made some exhibitions, for example, focused on the technique. We had an exhibition of graphic work, but our main purpose is to show the public the multidimensionality of Paula Rego's work, because it's so recognizing that her work has no boundaries, and it's not limited to the field of visual arts. Because she constantly engages in crossovers with other artistic manifestations such as theater, cinema, literature, poetry, and our educative program make these links, bringing some aspects of these other disciplines, and to try to engage with Paula Rego with another perspectives. So I think our work is so vast, and so that we have to, our exhibitions are always in constant progress. And we also make an investigation about a work from the 60s. We are making the catalogue raisonné, and the research is also a very important focus of the museum. So,
well, you are doing brilliant work. I will leave the link in the chat shortly. So if anyone that is not familiar with the museum should definitely have a look. You are always developing some very interesting programs. Thank you, Catarina, for that. So I guess that we could probably open the floor to anyone who has questions. Just make sure you can leave them in the chat, or you can raise your hands. Any questions are welcome. And while we are waiting, I would like to ask Elena about the exciting retrospective that it's about to open at the Tate Britain, which was installed, finally finalized the installation today, right? We were just talking about that. So I wanted to ask you about the behind the scenes process. So how long are you preparing this retrospective? Challenges that you faced, especially during the pandemic? If I'm not mistaken, you had to postpone the exhibition. And how was it to prepare this retrospective? You'll be showing around 100 works, so it's quite exciting. And I wanted you to talk a bit about that.
Yeah, it's such a big question. I mean, we started working around 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And certainly in a much more focused way with loan requests, you know, looking at the finalizing the list of works and then going towards loan requests in the past 2 years. The pandemic has been certainly very difficult in terms of practical and financial impediments and the inability to move. I did a very good trip to Portugal a year and a half ago nearly, when I met Catarina and so many other truly wonderful curators and researchers in Lisbon and Portugal. And it was such an exciting trip to look at the wonderful collections across the country, but also to just have the opportunity to discuss the work with so many experts who have engaged with their work for a very long time and have been looking after the work. And yeah, Casa de Histórias is one of those truly wonderful settings. It was very sad not to be able to return to Portugal and do more primary research. So yeah, there were certainly some very sad setback. We've been at the same time incredibly lucky with lenders in the UK, in Portugal and beyond, who have been incredibly generous and are lending to us despite all the worries and uncertainties. And I just hope they will feel rewarded. I believe if you feel you know Paula Rego, you will still have an extraordinary number of surprises. We have some really wonderful loans, many works that are very well known, but also many others that have very rarely been seen in public, if ever. And they are shown in a loosely chronological development that takes you across 60 years of work. And I believe really truly show how still fresh, raw, and exciting our work is. So yeah, very much look forward to the opening. Still, of course, installing all the way to the opening on the 5th to 7th of July.
It's almost around the corner, right? So I've shared the link from Casa das Histórias, so you are more than welcome to have a look and know more about our museum. And also I want to share the link from the Tate's exhibition, so you can have more information about retrospective. I'm not sure if, I don't think we have any questions, so we have very shy audience. But I think to finish, I wanted you to also share, if you had the time to look at the selected artists that are showing alongside Paula Rego, Elena Palma and Cliff Andrade. I would like you to share also your perspective around their works or their narratives, and how relevant are these differences between generations in a way. So feel free if you want to share something about them.
Well, I enjoyed very much coming to know the work of Ana Palma, which strikes me as horribly poignant in terms of the physicality of some of the images, and she's linked that she intends in the images. But I must say, I've only managed to see a few, and they immediately make me think about the abortion images of Paula Rego. So I feel that there's a lot of blood, a lot of pain, a lot of suffering in them. I'd like to know her work much better, but that was the trigger that they set off in my mind. that kind of anguish relating to the female body.
Yes, it is very much about struggling, and yeah, you should definitely look more into Anna's work. It's really strong as well, and provocative in a way. It has also some very strong feminist nuances. Yeah. Okay, so I think that yes, well, it's on time. It's literally on time, and we are just having some messages like from Gemma. Thank you to everyone for such an insightful discussion. From Lorenzo Bellinger, thank you, so interesting. It's been a wonderful show. I'm now looking forward to Tate's retrospective. And then Mathilde Rock, love this. Thank you so much. So I guess that with these messages, I just want to really thank you for being here today, for sharing your perspectives and your knowledge about Paula's work. And yes, I guess that's it. Thank you so much for being here, for contributing. Okay, for such a good conversation. I would go on for hours, but we can't. So.
Thanks very much for the invitation. Been very good getting to know you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Okay, thank you so much. Have a lovely afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.